What if I told you that there was a condition that could stop whirlwinds, lightning, and hailstorms, but also kill crops, dim mirrors, and blunt weapons just by looking at them? And wait, also, kill bees and make dogs mad. Could you guess what condition this is? It is a person on their period. I know, it sounds ridiculous. But it's what people in the past genuinely believed about menstruation. Thankfully, we've come a long way since then. Or have we? Menstruation enjoys a status similar to Voldemort in Harry Potter, in that being shall not be named. So much so, we have over 5,000 euphemisms for the word period. And I'm sure you've heard some of them. Shark Week, Auntie Flo, the time of the month. While these euphemisms seem innocent enough, they're actually indicative of global larger attitudes towards menstruation. Namely, one where it's supposed to be hush-hush. But is menstruation really that bad that we speak of it as if it's some genocidal wizard? I don't think so. Clearly, I've just said the word menstruation out loud a few times, and evidently I and the rest of you haven't been abracadabra to death. So maybe speaking about menstruation is not as bad as we're led to believe. But when coupled with systemic disinformation, a lack of education, and people in power who just aren't that much into critical thinking, this harmless stigmatization is doing real harm to an alarmingly high amount of people around the world. I'd like to share with you how I learned about periods. I am Malaysian, and growing up just outside the capital of the city, Kuala Lumpur, I didn't hear much about menstruation until it happened to me. So you can pretty much guess when I hit puberty and I got my first period. I was pretty shocked. Something was happening to my body, and I'm sure some of you can relate, that I didn't understand because no one in my circle really talked about it. One of my first and few experiences with menstrual education was from an annual talk from my deputy principal. It wasn't a talk so much as informing us that it was going to happen and for us to expect it, but it was in the manner that it was delivered that, in retrospect, seemed unnecessarily secretive. Every year, the boys were ushered out of the auditorium so we girls could have our secret little talk. From then, menstruation was portrayed as something that should be secret, instead of something that is a normal biological function experienced by half or more of the world's population. Thankfully, our science classes made up for what our school authorities lacked in teaching. So in biology, I learned about how the hormones fluctuate and how these govern the process of the menstrual cycle, and I understood the science behind the breakdown of the lining of the uterus to the ovulation to the fixing, and more. And for a while, this was enough. But it wasn't until my friend told me that her period had skipped a few months that I began to see my gap in knowledge about menstruation. To recap, from the outset, menstruation was seen as something that should not be mentioned in polite company. But when this literally goes on for generations, the stigmas and taboos get baked into society. And with this, and this might sound trivial so far, and in most cases, it probably is. But somehow, these stigmas, somehow, when coupled with policy changes, these can cause real harm. Take Malaysia, for example, fairly cosmopolitan country, where our major cities are much like other Southeast Asian countries with wonderful public services, great schools, and amazing local cuisine. But I tell you this not because I'm trying to promote Malaysia, but to make a point that even in a country that is reasonably well developed, many students have come forth to share their stories of period spot checks. Let me elaborate. Much like having your bag checked to prove that you didn't steal anything from a store, a period spot check required students to prove that they were bleeding before they could be exempted from religious duties or sports. Let that sink in. The indignity of this is twofold. Firstly, you are being treated in the same way that a suspected shoplifter is. And secondly, the bag that is being checked is in between your legs. Let me elaborate. We are talking about having your outer labia swabbed with cotton buds, to being groped to prove the presence of the pad, or downright having your underwear pulled down to prove that it's blood. And we're not talking about jungle villages here. We're talking about suburban high schools where the level of education and common sense is supposed to be reasonably high. And this isn't just a Malaysian problem. The lack of awareness and education on periods has also led to not just indignity, but real harm to menstruating people worldwide. Before I continue, let's have a poll. Raise your hands, how many of you have heard of food being sent to countries with food shortages? Okay, I can see many of you raise your hands up. Okay, now wait, keep your hands up. And only keep your hands up if you've heard of the same being applied to pads and tampons being sent to war-stricken countries like Afghanistan or Sudan, or countries affected by climate change. The number of hands that went down just kind of proves my point. In India, 12% of menstruating people cannot afford sanitary pads. Likewise, in Kenya, while pads are only $1, this number goes up to 50%. In Malaysia, I've seen some people in underprivileged communities use coconut husks, dirty rags, and newspapers in substitute for pads when they're not available or cannot be afforded. Not only can you imagine how uncomfortable this is, but on a more serious note, these unhygienic practices can lead to serious infections when exacerbated by the inability to access healthcare, can lead to death. But don't fret. You have two alternatives. Number one, continue going about your day without a pad, and then bleed through your pants and then be publicly shamed due to the rampant menstrual stigma that exists within your community. Or second, don't go about your day at all. Have your assignments piled up and then eventually drop out because you're unable to maintain a stable job or education. Clearly, neither of these options are great. But these are the choices that people in these scenarios face. They have to choose between their health or their livelihood or being publicly shamed due to a normal biological function that they cannot control. In essence, it is the poverty imposed on these people because of their periods. Let me be more precise. Period poverty refers to the lack of access to menstrual hygiene tools or education. And this is not just limited to sanitary pads, but also washing facilities and spaces of privacy. What I've mentioned just now is only the tip of the iceberg. Period poverty is actually a global crisis affecting 500 million people worldwide. That is 67 times the entire population of Hong Kong. But the issue with period poverty is that it's not any other crisis of this magnitude and this scale affecting this many people will result in celebrities singing songs to raise awareness and money being raised to save the victims. But the issue with period poverty is that it's a problem with no awareness. To solve a problem, you first need to identify it. But how do you get people to identify the correlation between period stigmatization and period poverty when people literally squirm the minute they hear about menstruation? We are talking about a problem that is unspoken at least and uncomfortable at most, shaming menstruators from even asking for help before they even open their mouths. As someone with a body that does much more than just bleed every month, it doesn't sit right with me to let a taboo regarding a natural biological function hold me or any other person sharing a similar pairing of chromosomes back. And with that in mind, I started an organization called Bulan Sisters, along with 3 other girls, where our primary objective is to advocate for the right for everyone to bleed with dignity. Bulan means the moon in Malay, our national language, which refers to the synchronicity between the menstrual cycle and the phases of the moon. Menstruation can be beautiful, can't it? Predictably, ever since starting the organization, we've received raised eyebrows and questions if period poverty is really even an issue. But who can blame them? With the media being constantly inundated with visible critical issues like the pandemic or climate change, period poverty quickly drops down to the bottom of the list. And while the Malaysian government is finally acknowledging it, we still don't have any statistics to prove just how big of a problem it is, making it a hidden problem that is out of sight, out of mind, hence out of governmental initiatives and out of policy changes. This lack of understanding on menstruation by the Malaysian government and how it affected people at a policy level was made clear during the COVID-19 pandemic, when pads were considered non-essential items, and we legally could not leave our house to buy them. It was as if the spread of COVID-19 took away our ability to menstruate. Yet another illogical scenario showcasing the impacts of unawareness on period poverty. Being on ground and understanding the gravity of the situation has pushed me and my other co-founders even harder to play our role in eradicating period poverty. As such, we've been running campaigns to destigmatize menstruation, hosting menstrual workshops for underprivileged communities, and giving out menstrual help kits. I remember a mother of 4 who could not afford to change her pads, increasing her chances of infection. Introducing her to reusable pads was life-changing. Such moments only strengthen my belief in the power that we have as individuals to create change, even if we start small. And this was the mindset we went with when trying to investigate the whole period spot check situation. Seeing that these cases spiked in the month of Ramadan, when Muslims fast between sunrise and sunset, we wanted to better understand the ties between menstruation and religion. Collaborating with another NGO in Malaysia, Sisters in Islam, we found out that menstruating people are actually exempted from religious duties on their period. But this is not because menstruation is considered an impure or unholy process in their religion, but rather that their God understands that menstruation is a trying time for those who are menstruating. And this exemption is completely necessary, as number 1, research shows that fasting while menstruating can lead to abnormal symptoms like infrequent menstruation and extra heavy bleeding. And secondly, imagine having to abstain from food while you're on your period. For those of you in the crowd who have not experienced what a menstrual cramp feels like, consider yourselves lucky. People have likened having menstrual cramps to having heart attacks. And as someone who has both torn her ligament and experienced extreme cramps, I can tell you that the second is much more painful. Unfortunately, experiences like these are often overlooked, as many people in the Bulan Sisters community have come forth to share their stories of how they had to eat in secret during Ramadan, as if it was the equivalent of doing drugs. Or they continue fasting while tired and in pain because they didn't want anyone to find out that they were on their period, or even worse, having to undergo a period spot check. After a lot of push, the Malaysian government and its education and health ministers finally condemned the use of any such practice. A mini victory, yes, but still, it isn't enough. Menstrual stigma still remains as one of the many systemic factors perpetuating inequality that we still frequently ignore. And now, while I can only be present in Bulan Sisters stakeholders meetings and workshops held online, I'm still taken aback when our participants ask questions like, are our periods a curse? It shows me that there is so much more we can do, but nothing will compare to the difference that it will make by getting governments on board, by spreading awareness and normalizing conversations on periods. Today, I intend to help you realize your potential to bring change. Let's start by discussing menstruation with our non-menstruating peers as casually as we do with their counterparts. With this, we educate one another and raise awareness on menstruation that can ripple through all levels of society, starting from our individual social circles. Let this be a stepping stone to truly freeing menstruating people from the barriers holding them back from participating in public life, attending schools while menstruating, and protect them from any and all acts that violate their bodily rights. Eradicating period poverty and implementing a holistic period education is essential for creating a world where menstruation is not considered shameful, and instead, every menstruating person can be proud of it. After all, our periods remind us each month of our ability to give birth to new generations and do life activities while bleeding, something even the strongest men cannot. And that's on menstruation, period.